Here we are. We're on part 13 now, blood vessels, page 739. And we're actually tiptoeing now into the skull, as it were. As long as we're here, right here at the anterior aspect, we're going to be considering also the nasal cavity of the individual. And I've kind of created a little sort of circle there of blood vessels. And I've identified them as the pterygoid plexus. Pterygoid spelled Pteryggoid. Pterygoid. You'll remember that there are two pterygoid processes on the sphenoid bone. Right? So we're sort of in that sort of general area. And these plexes then are emptying backwards. Everything flows backwards. The blood from the facial vein is flowing back this way. The blood from the pterygoid plexus is flowing back. This is in essence a danger area of the face, according to the Barbara Bates nursing physical diagnosis book. Usually in your first year in nursing, and even in medical school in the first semester, there's the Barbara Bates book of physical diagnosis, and she notes that the region around the nose, just above the nose, up here in the forehead, the upper lip, all of it is draining back this way. And of course, this is where we have upper respiratory infections. We have bacteria and viruses and so on. And it's possible for that infective material to then travel to the brain, particularly the meninges. What's going on here with the meninges is that the dura mater is double layered in the brain, not in the spinal cord, only in the brain. And the double layer comes apart. Isn't that cool? And allows for what we call venous sinuses or dural venous sinuses. So there's a venous sinus here, and that one is called the superior, let's go over here, superior sagittal sinus. And then right here we have the inferior sagittal sinus, just the way you like it. And then there's an actual vein here. It's not a dural sinus. It's a great vein of Galen. The great vein of Galen. And it joins up with the inferior, let me have the word here, sagittal sinus. And together they are tributaries and form what's called the straight sinus. Okay, so here's the straight sinus right here. Now what's happening here, if you're familiar with the dura, this part of the dura mater, is that there is a sideways overlay on top of the cerebellum. And I think they call it the tentorum cerebellum. And as a child, I would, of course, want to sleep out in the backyard in a tent. And of course, that's what I think of. The cerebellum has its own little tent. So the tentorum, the cerebellum. And it's got a little seam right here through which the straight sinus is passing. And the straight sinus ends up here at the far back of the skull. And it's going to join with the superior sagittal sinus at a place called the confluence of sinuses. And then we're going to have a sideways movement here, the transverse sinus, which is going to join the sigmoid S-curved sinus, the sigmoid sinus, and will empty down through the jugular foramen into what is the beginning of the internal jugular, the right internal, in this case, jugular vein. Notice that we have coming from the cavernous sinus right here. The cavernous sinus is overlying the sella turcica, where the hypothalamus and the pituitary is living. And they come back here through two arches. They're called petrosal. Excuse me. The book did not enter that nomenclature, so I had to write it in here. Petrosal, P-E-T-R-O-S-A-L, petrosal sinuses. And they're coming across the top of that ridge right there where we have our hearing and balance mechanisms. And they're emptying here as well. So this is all, and I have the little red arrows here showing you the movement of blood. It's all from front to back. And I was talking about the danger area of the face and the fact that bacteria and viruses can sort of percolate through this area. And oftentimes, if you begin to work for infirmaries for major universities, one of the things that you do, you're alerted, every late August and early September, to be on the lookout for students who are coming from far and wide, who might be picking up, they might be, how would I say, vulnerable or naive to some of the infective agents, the pathogens, the bacteria and the viruses that other people are carrying. And so be aware that somebody might come into your infirmary with a headache, a stiff neck, and the very beginnings of what becomes a spiking fever. And you need to treat that person aggressively. And why is that? Is because that person could be presenting with meningitis, which under those conditions could result in sudden death in a relatively small percentage of cases, but a significant percentage of cases. And so the school is really on the lookout oftentimes for that sort of thing. Okay, so that brings us back to this picture right here, or forward, however you want to look at it. And we have our Azygos, we have our superior vena cava, our brachiocephalic friends right there, left and right vein. We've already talked about that. I'm going to look at the back of the thoracic cavity here, and I'm going to notice that there are some veins that are traveling parallel to the spinal column. Okay, and I have some arrows here. This is the azygos right here. Okay, and it's identified right there, the azygos, just the way you like it. Okay, so it's the azygos, and it's going to empty right in there. It's going to pick up, look how it's picking up the blood from the posterior intercostal veins. That's the azygos, picking up that blood right there. Now, that's only on the right side, and I want you to make a note of that. It's only on the right side. Over here on the left side, we also have posterior intercostal veins that are in the subcostal groove, okay, of each rib, and they're flowing into differently named veins right here. This is called the Hemi Azygous. Okay, Hemi Azygous. And then up here, flowing down this way, we have something called the Accessory Hemi Azygous. Okay, so the Accessory Hemi Azygous is flowing downward and across. That's the Accessory Hemi Azygous. The Hemi Azygous is flowing upward and across. All of this is emptying into the azygos, which then empties into the superior vena cava. Okay, so then let's come over here. We have a subclavian vein that we identified earlier on. This is the right subclavian. It's behind the clavicle, protected. When we look at it at this end, as it's sort of uncovered from the clavicle, we have something that's referred to as the axillary. Notice that we have this is a superficial vein right here, even though it looks really big, and sometimes it is. It's called the cephalic vein. It runs along the forearm, along the lateral edge of the forearm. It forms here with the lateral wall of the antecubital region. It continues along on top of the biceps right here. If you see somebody with really well-developed biceps, lean skin, and they're sort of showy, showing off their cephalic vein. Okay, cephalic vein, not to be confused with the basalic vein right here. This is the basalic vein, comes up this way. Okay, so it's going to be emptying actually into the last portion of the axillary. So that's one of the rules here, is that if you need to do a, well, we'll talk about that at some point, but this is actually a way to get into here if you're trying to intubate any of this through there. Okay, so now we're coming on down, and in this region we actually have our brachial vein coming down. It's close to the bone right there. It's going to divide into the ulnar and the radial vein. But notice how much cutaneous venous material there is here. These things that are sort of light in color are actually the deep veins, and these things that are darker in color are actually the cutaneous veins. Okay, so something to behold, as it were. Okay, we have our radial vein sort of coming up here and being the major contributor to this whole set of veins here. We have our arch and our digitals right there.